Hello and welcome back to the Odds Now YouTube channel for the latest episode of our Better Days Ahead podcast, which covers all things punting. In the chair, as always, you have myself, Matt Hill, and my co-host, sports trader and betting enthusiast, Felix Morson-Pate. And if you're watching us for the first time, well, welcome aboard. What we like to do here on Better Days Ahead is tackle a different topic every week from the world of sports betting and really take a deep dive into that subject. And we'll bookend that with some general chit-chat about our betting week just gone and the best week ahead of us. There's also a slot at the end of the pod to discuss a topic of the viewers' choosing. So please do get your requests in on the comment section below. If there's anything you'd like us to chat through or hear our opinions on, we'd love to hear from you. And if you do enjoy what you hear over the next hour or so, please do give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to hit subscribe for all the latest videos from Odds Now. And when you do subscribe, it obviously supports the channel and our attempts to grow it. So Felix will dive straight in with that chat about the week that has just gone. And yeah, it's been, I suppose, in the football and national, I think it's fair to say, is received in a Marmite fashion by the bulk of football fans and punters. Are you a player of the international break? Do you get stuck in, or is this time for you to take a bit of time off?
I love getting stuck into the international break.
You
It's
love getting
nice.
stuck into everything, don't you? Really, you're a
Exactly,
volume
yeah.
man.
Yeah, but also it's quite a nice quiet week for us at work, because there's no other top level football going on other than we had Nations League and World Cup qualifiers, but they're spread out quite thin. So it was a nice relaxing week, which allowed me to get stuck into a bit more punting. And I think it just goes back to what I was saying last week when talking about the handicap betting. If you've got a system or an angle that's quite good at finding the difference in quality between two teams or two participants in a sport, I think there's a lot of value to be had in the international market. If you are focused on more of a handicapping route, I do see the difficulties because the squads change even just a little bit between windows. You've got players who don't necessarily play together well, managers that aren't, I wouldn't necessarily always say at the same standard as club managers, but certainly they've got a lot less time to implement their tactical ideas on the players.
Well, I think England maybe saw a little bit of that, didn't they, with Thomas Tuchel? Very difficult for him to go in and make them all bells and whistles against two low blocks.
Absolutely, and I think looking at spots like that where you've got a new manager coming in, or even perhaps I think a lot of the talk was about England's attack going into that first game. But if you look at Albania's recent record against bigger sides, even in the Euros when they were in somewhat of a group of death with Spain,
superb,
Italy, and Croatia, they did not disgrace themselves, and they very rarely lose games by a lot of goals. So yeah, I found a lot of value on playing some plus handicaps on some underdogs, the likes of Macedonia getting a point against Wales. In the African qualifiers as well, the goal lines tend to be very low, so you can get some good value on the underdogs there. Yeah, it was a nice week on the football. And then for anyone who's a fan of sports involving hitting things, we've got the IPL back, which has been exciting. It's been a good start to that tournament. Feeling my way into it very slowly, mostly just betting on results and handicaps there, but dive into some player props after a couple of matches when we see what the lineups are shaking out to be. And also, although there's been two early season games in Japan between the Cubs and the Dodgers, as they've got quite a strong Japanese contingent, the Major League Baseball season starts properly today. 15 games from about 7 o'clock as we record on Thursday tonight, every day for the next 4 or 5 months. Really looking forward to getting my teeth stuck into that. How about yourself?
Sounds like heaven if you like your baseball, but yeah, I don't think I could pick a baseball player out of a lineup, to be honest. Definitely not an area of strength for me. But yeah, I admire anybody that does have these focus on these side of, well, we call it a niche sport, but in America it wouldn't be a niche sport, would it? So yeah, no, for me as regulars know, darts is my main focus. I had a Euro Tours to get stuck into at the weekend. Outright, it was a frustrating one. I had 3 in the last 16. Nyman 50, Watamina 100, and Schindler 100, and they all went out 6-5 in the last 16, which fine margins. I always think when I get to the last 16 with double-handed or treble-handed, I just want one through as a minimum, so that I could kind of leverage and lay off a little bit. And then, I tend to take my chances. If I've got 3 gone in the last 16, I think, right, let's get 1 through. If we get 2 or 3 through, it's a bonus. To lose them all 6-5, it was a bit painful. Yeah, but it had an open feel to it, that tournament. There was no Littler. Humphreys went out quite early. And so it proved with the final of Nathan Aspinall, who'd never won a Euro 2, remarkably, and Ryan Joyce. Joyce hurt me more than Aspinall, to be honest. Yeah, he still floats around at 3 figures for these kind of tournaments. And to be honest, with Ryan Joyce, it's normally a clue in itself when he travels to a Euro Tour, because he's not a particularly frequent flyer. He's got a bit of a fear of flying. So maybe that's a clue in itself when he rocks up in Germany. But he played really, really well. Just ran out of gas in the final. Pleased for Aspinall, who's had a lot of troubles with his throw. Really good to see him playing so well and coming through the other side of that. And it was a thoroughly deserved victory. He had a great 170 checkout in the semi-final against Gary Anderson. 6-5 down. Anderson spurned a couple of match starts, and Aspinall took a 170 and then won the decider. So enjoyed the tournament. Was negative on the outright market. I did have some fun playing with Bet365's new Bet Builder, which they're offering for darts matches. I do often think these products, when they're rolled out, although they are, rigorously tested before going to market, you can just find little angles in with them in the early weeks and months where, it might not be a visually attractive bet, but you can add certain legs, and the number that it spits out at the end, it can sometimes be quite attractive. So I placed 7 of those across the weekend, and I managed to hit 2 at 9-1 and 15-2. So I think we have to take that as a successful first trial. The elements for anyone that's interested, I'm kind of playing around with, is a bull finish in the match. His price at odds against, but for certain players over best of 11 legs, there are going to be much more bull opportunities left than others. So it's trying to find the stats there to lean you in that right direction. One of the games I managed to clock a winner on was Gerwin Price, who I always think loves the bull, and there's lots of numbers to back that up. So that's one angle I'm looking at. And then taking the player 180 lines and combining them manually. So, for example, rather than taking over 3.5 180s in the match, backing both players to have over 1.5 180 could be spitting you out a similar price. So you're getting a little bit of edge there. So it's just playing with these things and working out, knowing the right games to take them on as well, because there are unders lines there as well. And sometimes 2 players just are not a good matchup for each other, and it can be quite a slow, low quality affair as well. So I'll continue to have a play around with that and see what comes. But no, other than that, relatively quiet week, to be honest. I don't really get stuck into the internationals that much. I tend to watch England and maybe like to have a little fun flutter on that. I did cop Reece James' first goal scorer, but that was more through luck than judgment, to be honest, because I was
watching. What a goal it was as well.
Well, I was watching it, and after 10 minutes, I thought, well, that was a waste of money. I mean, he's not even overlapping his winger. But then, yeah, what a free kick! So that was a nice bit of luck. Probably owed a few bits of lucks after a few bad beats, but I'm sure everybody feels that way with their betting. But yeah, it should be a busier week next week, I think, as we'll come on to at the end of the show. But now we've got the intros and the chit chat out of the way, we'll dive into this week's main topic, which here on episode 5 is multiples, accumulators, parlays, whatever you want to call them, really. The concept of perming several selections from different events together to create a multiple bet. And we're going to sort of look at these in depth. Are they useful bets? Should they be avoided? If there are ways of using them properly, how is that done? And various other elements to this talk. I'll start by saying that I think multiple bets, accumulator bets, without doubt the most popular bet for the recreational punter, the chance to turn a small amount into a large fortune. And it is that sort of equivalent of playing the lottery, isn't it, really? That people like to stake small and win big and have big dreams. And I do think that accumulators definitely have their place, but I think most people will know now that with an accumulator, the odds are not stacked in your favor. And I'm sure that really we try and focus on how to make more profit and be a more efficient bettor. Felix, is there any positives for people who play accumulators regularly?
Yes, but you've got to know the shark infested waters that you're swimming in by doing that. And I do think generally I am not a big advocate for multiples, and we've discussed this off air before. And you run into a lot more trouble if they are the main type of bets you're playing. That being said, yeah, I do think if you can find small edges and compound them in multiples, and you really do know a specific market or a specific area really well, I think they can be an absolute gem for, like I say, rolling up little bits of value into a much bigger payout. And I do think they are a great way for people who want to play smaller stakes to get involved in betting. You know, you don't, when you're playing sort of handicap lines like me, it's very difficult to make a lot of money. I'm generally set my benchmark at like 2% for a year. Whereas if you're playing multiples, you know, if you're even semi competent at them and you're beating the margin, you could be looking at 15, 20% a year if you're pretty decent on your multiples. So there's definitely a benefit to them, but I think it's knowing what types to play, what markets to play them in, and having a clear plan rather than just sticking on a crazy fivefold or whatever.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a crazy fivefold there, and I think we should just sort of drill down into actually the makeup of a multiple and the makeup of why they can be so inefficient from a value perspective. So we're talking about maybe a football accumulator on the weekend where somebody's putting, say, 5 selections into one accumulator, and yes, the payout will be nice, but the reason that it's sort of inefficient in terms of value, even if you've got a couple of prices that you've kind of correctly identified as being good value, it only really takes one of them to have a bit of negative value in, and it does kind of evaporate any other value you've managed to unearth in that, and it puts a real focus on every selection having to be a positive EV, and that is really, really difficult to do, particularly for the casual punter. You might be a really, really good judge on something like football, and you might have 5 fancies across, I don't know, the EFL, for example, on the weekend. But even if 3 of them are positive, you get one wrong, and any like sort of progress you've made by identifying these 3 winners, that's going to be wiped out almost instantly. And I suppose the angle of playing the 5 singles is if your 3 good ones land, you're almost certainly going to be ahead for the weekend. You only need one of them to fail, and you're going to be running at a loss. And most weeks, one of them are going to fail, aren't they? And it's a long game. And the other thing I would question about multiples is I do think that betting is very much in the mind, and there's a lot of neurology behind it and different personality types and people approaching this game differently. Like me and you, we come in from different angles. And I do think that people who like playing multiples, you can sort of create a personality profile of your average multiple better. It's probably somebody that is chasing a big win. It's probably somebody that is always kind of dreaming rather than planning for small incremental gains. They're looking for, I want to get there now from A to Z rather than from A to B to C to D. And it probably does come hand in hand as well with a little bit of recklessness and a little bit of impulsiveness as well. And I don't want to put everybody in the same boat there, but I do tend to think people that like bashing on tenfold accumulators and stuff, they probably haven't got the patience to grind away at something like a 2% profit margin like you're referring to there. Now, that's not a bad thing at all, but you do need to be aware of what impact that's going to have on your bankroll and on your profit and loss. Generally, it's going to be extremely erratic. You're going to have really big highs, but that's almost certainly going to be followed by really big lows as well. And the problem with really big lows is we're playing in a game here, like you say, shark infested waters. You could get wiped out very quickly placing multiple bets. You have to have a really clear plan of how often you got to hit these multiples to be ahead, and also how quickly you can lose everything with a losing streak, because it's just you're playing you're almost playing a game of chance in most circumstances, and that's never a good thing, is it really?
No, I think, yeah, like you said, the personality types is the thing. I'm quite happy to play the long game, lay out 5 singles, and 5 times my stake, knowing that I'm much more likely to get some sort of return, even if it's nowhere near as big. And even if all 5 of those cop, I'm not one of these people that goes, "Oh, I wish I'd have covered it with the fivefold
I am.
back in now."
I
Yeah, and I
definitely am.
know we talked about that in the first episode with the Ajorc chair
Mm.
Caicedo treble. Um, but maybe sometimes I'll play the tricks and we'll come on to those in the different types. But I'm always just focused on those small gains, like you say. And I think, yeah, it's really important, even though they can appear on the surface to be almost like throwaway bets, and bookmakers do really heavily promote them because they know at the end of the day that's what's going to make them the biggest margin and the most business and driving traffic towards those. And even the fact that they laud people who win big accumulators because they know it's going to encourage hundreds more people to put them on, and in the long run the bookies are going to come out well on top. I do think you still have to have a plan into going into these, rather than seeing them as those throwaway casual bets. If you do stick to a plan with them and you are still identifying the right spots to bet them in, you just don't want to lay out what you might have to win it back in a single, and you do want to try and compound what you perceive as value. Still stick to a strategy, and like we talked about last week, find your edge, play into those markets. Don't just see them as, oh, I'm just going to have a bit of fun. If you do want to take your betting a bit more seriously, that is.
Yes, agreed. Yeah. So, I mean, like I say, accumulator betting, it does come hand in hand with a certain type of punter. And I'm not going to slag that kind of punter off because I have been there and I still am there to an extent. I still do place a lot of multiples. But I do it in a lot more professional manner now. And I've got a tab on my spreadsheet purely for multiple bets. And it's a really, really good way of sort of, you could gauge an average price of what's winning for you and what's not. And that's really useful as well. So if you're able to click things in and around the 8-1 mark quite regularly, but every time you go north of 20-1, you're losing. That's probably a big clue in itself that you need to cut these sort of dreamy accumulators away and just focus on doing what you are doing correctly. Because we could give practical examples here. We've talked already in this podcast, referenced the word compounding a few times, and some people might not be familiar with the relevance of compounding in betting. So just to be clear, if you have a positive expected value, let's take an example where you've, I don't know, got a 6-4 chance that you make more like even money, then that's a big advantage there. Now, if you could find 2 of those and stick them in a double, what you're actually doing is you're compounding the edge that you have. You're giving yourself an even bigger edge. So you could play both singles and the double to compound your edge. Now, we talk about being not being outcome focused and things like that. So if you've placed a double where both selections were value, I don't think that that's a bad bet to place, regardless of whether it wins or loses. But you've still got to have this process in place, haven't you, of knowing when you've backed a positive value selection and when you haven't. And we've referred to it in previous episodes. The easiest way for a recreational punter to start doing this: write down the price that you took and write down the price that it went off before kickoff. If your price was better, you can safely assume that you were on a good bet there. And for your multiples, going away, looking at your 5-fold accumulator and seeing what price the 5 teams actually went off, it might be an eye opener for you. You might think that you've put a good bet on, but regardless of whether it wins or loses, if 4 of those 5 have gone off at bigger prices, that was a terrible bet. And you might have a little bit of luck on your side to land one. You're certainly going to need them with multiples if you're playing them on a regular basis. But that will even out unless you address your process. So when you're placing a multiple bet, you need to have real confidence in every selection. And this is another thing that I really see a lot of people do that grates me with recreational betting. It's very much a case of, I've got these 2 things that I fancy, and I'm just going to add on a few selections like Man City, Liverpool. I'm going to get it boosted up, if you will. Normally, these Premier League teams, there's not an inch of value in their price. Now, as a result, it might not necessarily be a hugely negative expected value that you're dealing with there. But I find it very hard to believe that by adding big price favourites onto an accumulator to boost the price, you're actually adding any value. You're probably chipping away at any value you have managed to unearth. So, there's a reason why bookmakers are always promoting most popular accumulator today, most popular selections today. And it'll always be Man City to beat Leicester 1-16 or whatever. And how many people are going to just add that on? And the argument back will be, well, it took my 8-1 5-fold up to a 10-1 6-fold, and Man City are never going to lose. Yeah, but you're missing the point there. If you keep putting prices onto your accumulators that aren't positive expected value, it is going to hurt your returns in the long run. You're bringing more variance into play in a bet that is already absolutely littered with variance. So you've just got to go into this with your eyes wide open, effectively.
Yeah, it's that classic debate amongst in a bettor's head about what you think is going to win versus what you make as a value price. So I have this pretty much every week. I've spoken a couple of times on this podcast about the tenfold that me and my friends put on every Saturday, and I track all the teams we pick and the prices and the results. And over the last, I think we've been going 20 odd weeks now. I on average pick the shortest prices, but I never pick a short price that I don't think is bigger than what I think it is, because I am looking for selections that win, because ultimately in an accumulator you need all your selections to win. But I am also looking for ones where, even if it's just 4%, 5% bigger than what I think the price should be, I would never just stick a short price in because it's a short price and I think the team's going to win. Whereas I think there might be a couple of other people where, if they've had a couple of losing weeks where they pick bigger price and they've not come off, they do want to pick a safer pick. But I don't know if all 10 of us are following the same process when we pick those selections into an ACCA.
I think you can
And I
safely assume you're probably not, having dealt
no,
with
of
groups
course.
of 10 before. So.
Yeah. So yeah, that is the difficulty. And I think, going back to what you said about prices, I think real sweet spot with accumulator prices. I think shorter than maybe 3-1, 4-1, you're not getting any value, because all the there's something called the favorite long shot bias, but that works sometimes in the opposite favor when you're betting loads of favorites into a really quite short priced accumulator. But that comes way more into effect once you go out probably bigger than 20, 25-1. So the theory goes that favorites are always priced more efficiently than outsiders. So if something's a 10-1 shot, it's more likely it's actually a 20-1 shot. Whereas if something's threes on, chances are it is pretty close to threes on as the true price. So anything in that sort of 5-1 to 25-1 range, that's probably where you are extracting the most value from these accumulators. Anything shorter, you're probably not being able to compound much value because the prices are efficient. And anything bigger than that, the prices probably aren't reflecting the true odds of what the long shots are.
Yeah, do you know what? That rings true for me as well. I think, having a little look on my sheet earlier, and most of the ones I have managed to hit this year have probably been somewhere around the 10-1 mark. And that's probably, without knowing the theory that you've just sort of explained there, it definitely does ring true with my personal experience. Now, we do have to factor in that not everybody bets the same. Now, professional punters as well, they just wouldn't, generally speaking, even entertain a double. They would very much focus on individual prices. And when we look at people who trade on Betfair as well, they're dealing with like ticks rather than actual prices. So just to give a little bit more context for those who don't trade on Betfair, when a horse moves, for example, in a horse market, when you've got something at 4.0, it's going to, the next tick down is 3.8 and the next tick down is 3.6. Whereas when you get into odds on shots, they're literally moving by another decimal point. So they're going from 1.99 to 1.98 to 1.97. And I guess the importance of that is just like prices, bigger prices will move by a greater amount quicker. Whereas when you're dealing with odds on shots, any movement in the market, although it might still be significant, it's going to be a lot smaller. So when you're doing this compounding effect, I think focusing on those bigger prices, like you said, there is logic there that you're more likely to get a rick between something that's 4-1 that should be 5-1 than say something that's 10-11 and it should be 8. You know, I mean, from something to go to 10-11 to go to 8-11 might not sound a lot in your head. If you actually look at a Betfair sort of a ladder on Betfair of just how much that has got to move down to actually get to that price, that's got to take a serious volume of money to move that price. Whereas moving from 4 to 5, it's not going to take much money at all. So that's definitely, I think, something to bear in mind. Maybe look at, if you're looking at winning more football accumulators, move away from those really short price favourites and maybe look at these games that are priced up a little bit more evenly or a slight outsider and see if you can extract your value from there. I do think that there's definitely something in that.
Yeah, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be like as big as that. Like, my favorite types of football accumulators, and we'll probably come into other sports in a bit, but I generally look at teams priced between about 4-6 and 6-5. and that tends to be my wheelhouse when I'm looking to build a multiple. And I'm looking for usually, like I say, about 5 to 10% of expected value. So a price that's 5 to 10% bigger, because in that region, you're still getting a bit of compounding value. And also, you are getting teams that are generally more likely than not. Even in the worst case scenario, there you're looking at like a 40% expected win probability. So I generally like to look at those prices, roll up 5 or 6, and get something around the, like you say, 10 to 1, 15 to 1 mark. And I generally beat my expected strike rate on those kind of ones. I used to play a lot shorter prices in accumulators, and I got burnt far too much doing that. So that's sort of the region of the market that I feel quite comfortable sitting in. But again, it's all about your evolution as a bettor, finding the areas, not just in terms of what markets you're playing, but the price brackets in the market that you seem to find as your sweet spot.
When we talk about accumulators and the importance of them to bookmakers, I mean, they are a profit-making machine for bookmakers, and you already touched on it here. Promoting big wins. This is one that always gets me. Such and such won 100,000 on this week's Premier League football. Well, just to give you some context here, if you win a 10 to 1 accumulator, I can almost guarantee you there's 50 customers losing a 10 to 1 accumulator at the same time as you that you never hear another squeak about. So we do have to be also, as punters, very cautious of the bookmaker PR wheel that is constantly in action here. They desperately want you to place these bets. But I'm a big advocate of actually that these bets aren't all bad. You just need to go in with your eyes wide open and know how to execute best on them. It brings us nicely onto the different types of multiples, because just having a straight accumulator or a parlay, for example, it's the most common, but it's certainly not the only one. In fact, there's a ludicrous amount of unique multiple bet types that you could be placing. Horse racing punters in particular will be very, very familiar with these. Most of these originate in the realms of horse racing, but can be now used across all sports thanks to the digital evolution. Trixies are one that I do play quite frequently, and that's a very simple bet to get your head around. It's 3 selections, and you're basically placing 4 times your desired stake. You're covering the 3 possible doubles and the treble. Now, I like a Trixie, and it's mainly because it's just the nature of the beast. When I'm operating in darts, in a match, there might be 8 matches in a session. I'll normally have 2 or 3 bets that I fancy more than my other selections, and they might make up the basis of a Trixie for me. And again, I'm dealing in something there where I'm confident I'm on 3 value prices, and I want to compound that. And I have had success with that method. Are Trixies something that you ever play there, Felix?
Yeah, I quite like it. They are probably the most common multiple I'll play, even more so than straight accumulators. Um, like you say, I think it's for those tournaments where you've got a lot of matches in a session, and there's probably a couple that are taking your fancy. I think it's a good way to again cover your bases. It all comes back to that risk management philosophy that we've talked about so many times. So tennis, generally, I quite like to play Trixies on, similar to you in darts. If there's a round of a tournament where I quite like 2 or 3 games, then it makes sense to put those in a Trixie, usually either a quarter point or half point, or for my case, 0.25 or 0.5% of the bankroll rather than the standard 1%. But yeah, I think it's a really good way to cover off your strongest fancies without necessarily having to up your stakes and still generate quite a good return. Same goes for the NBA. If I like a team, but I'm not a fan of their point spread, and I don't want to play the alternate line because more of the margin is going on those alternate lines than the main spread line, then again, I'll play a Trixie with the teams I like there, so that as long as they win, I'm getting my return, and I don't necessarily have to rely on them to win by a certain amount of points.
Yeah, I mean, when I place them, generally I'm looking for in and around that even money mark on the 3 selections would be my general rule. And just to give you a practical example of this, say you were placing, I don't know, a £5 Trixie for a £20 total stake. You've got 3 £5 doubles and a £5 treble on. And if it's 3 confident selections for me, I will consider playing the Trixie, because if I get 2 of them up, I'm going to get my stake returned in full. effectively. And it's not too dissimilar to betting Asian handicaps, really. You know that getting the 2 up out of the 3 is going to bring you a return. Whereas a 1 or none is going to see a stake lost, and a 3 out of 3 is going to see a full return, if you will. So that's why I like Trixies. They do have similarities with the Asian handicap market in that you're just kind of balancing the risk reward. And if you click a full Trixie, you're still getting a really nice win. It might not be quite as glamorous as a straight treble, but I just like that added insurance, really. And like I say, I will quite often on a day where there's loads of darts on, I'll have maybe 5 or 6 selections that I want to be with. Of those, there will be 2 or 3 inevitably that I'm stronger on than the others, and that makes for my Trixie. And I can roughly, when I'm going consistently in and around that even money mark, I know roughly what my doubles are going to pay, i.e. stake back. I know roughly what the full house is going to pay, and I can very easily calculate how many of these I need to be getting up over the course of a sample to be profitable. And if it's not working, if it's really not working for me, I could always ditch them. But I do think that having that excitement and having that chance of when you really do get a good read on a card to really maximize the profit, I do have that empty feeling in my stomach sometimes that you talked about. You said you're not one of these people that wishes you'd had the multiple on. I do. And Trixies have been a really good way of me still getting that fulfillment of, oh, I've really nailed that and I've got a really good return because of it, versus just a bit of risk management. And still being quite confident that I'm going to get my stake back, worst case scenario. And look, the dream situation is you get your first 2 up 2 from 2, and you've basically got a free bet on your third selection, with your money back in hand, and you're still getting that excitement of a decent return. So it's an important part of my arsenal. I do place Trixies more than any other multiple, I think it's fair to say. My straight accumulator bets have definitely fell by the wayside in recent years. I'll still have the odd one on the football, but it'll be very much recreational. And like I said there as well, like the fivefold that we discussed in episode 1 and took until about episode 500 to get resolved. That was a fun bet, really. I'd played the singles and I just wanted to roll them up. And it's great when they cop, but I'm under no illusions. If I go in and try and do that again for the next 20 days straight, I probably won't. So you have to, again, go in with your eyes wide open there. There are various similar types of bets to Trixies, and you could go up and up and up on the stakes. Lucky 15 is a term many people would be familiar with, very synonymous with horse racing. That's picking 4 selections and you're covering the singles, doubles, trebles, and the fourfolds. Now, Lucky 15s I am generally against. I used to love them when I was a young lad getting into punting. I would go into the shop, I'd put a Lucky 15 on the next 4 races, minimum stakes, and I'd have 45 minutes of racing to watch, and I'd maybe get a little bit of a return. Occasionally you get 4 from 4 up. It was a fun bet for me. Now I'm trying to be more profitable and more ruthless. I don't like them. And the main reason why is because you're effectively putting 15 times your stake on this bet. And 4 of your stakes are going on singles. Now, to me, if you want to cover the singles on 4 selections, you want to be having a bit more than 4/15 of your total stake. So I would rather just bin off the singles entirely. If I wanted to place a bet similar to that across 4 selections, I would definitely lean towards a Yankee, which is 11 legs rather than 15, and it's getting rid of the singles. Because let's just say here we've got a Lucky 15 on 4 horses to a £1 stake. It's cost me £15 in total. If I get 1 winner and 3 losers, I'm not even going to get my stake back. I'm going to get a paltry return, possibly £3 or £4 from a £15 stake. To me, it's just not worth it. I'm not placing a multiple bet. If I'm placing a multiple bet and I'm not accepting a certain level of jeopardy, I shouldn't be placing a multiple bet. Pure and simple. If you are placing a Lucky 15 and you're happy getting £6 back from your £15 or whatever, I would consider not playing Lucky 15s at all. I would honestly say that they're probably not the bet for you. I do think they are useful in one certain scenario, which we could come on to after this. But yeah, it will be Yankees all the way for me. And generally, I think when you're getting up into the levels of 4 selections and up, I suppose people are wanting to click all the singles, doubles, trebles, but really, the only ones that are going to pay you the money worth your salt is maybe trebles and up, isn't it? So I would reduce the stake on the smaller return bets and focus more of your stake on the higher return, if that's a bet you want to play.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I don't ever play anything up from Trixie, if I'm perfectly honest. But I do see the logic in it. Yeah, they are quite fun, and if it does click, that is a really, really satisfying feeling, I'm sure. I don't know if we're on the same wavelength here when we're thinking about this, but for me, if you do want to play the Lucky 15 over the Yankee, the one place I would possibly ever look to do it would be on anti-post markets.
Yeah, I mean, anti-post markets is where I play most of my multiples, so I'll give them their own sort of section in a minute. But no, just while you've asked, the way I would use a lucky 15, and bear in mind this is if you want to get your account limited very fast, what we call dirty each way races in horse racing, a concept I'm sure a lot of listeners will be familiar with, but for anyone that isn't, these are basically races where they'll have probably somewhere around the 8 or 9 runner mark. So you're getting 3 places with your each way terms. But what you want there for a perfect makeup of a dirty each way race would be a short price favourite and a few horses that have no chance, 100 to 150 to 1, etc. And you're going to focus on those 2 or 3 horses below the favourite. And the reason that this works is because bookmakers, when they're pricing up that market, they have to offer a win price relative to the favourite's probably going to win this. However, what that does is it opens up an attractive each way price for the second favourite, third favourite, etc. So let's say we've got an even money favourite in there, and the second favourite is 9-2. Well, the second favourite has to be 9-2 because of its win chance. It's a lot better than the other runners in the race. But what that is effectively giving you is when you back it each way, you're getting a 5-4 on a place, and the horses in behind are nowhere near the level, and really that 5-4 should be odds on. Now that's an edge that you can use something like a lucky 15 or a Trixie to compound that edge. We talk about edge compounding as well. So if you pick 4 dirty each way races and place the lucky 15, the place element of the lucky 15 is going to be massive value. The win element won't be, but you're just effectively looking to get 3 or 4 places. And this is a strategy that's been proven to work time and again, but unfortunately bookmakers, for obvious reasons, don't like it. It will see accounts limited. But yeah, I'm not averse to the odd one when there's a big meeting on and when there's plenty of each way money languishing about. I mean, if you're coming, what are we now on a Wednesday? If you're getting stuck into Chelmsford tonight and trying to put a dirty each way lucky 15 together, I don't think the bookies are going to entertain you for very long. But it just goes to show again that there are certain scenarios where these bets can work, but 99% of multiples being placed are being bet erratically without any rhyme or reason, and that's why they're so good for bookmakers. And that's why, unfortunately, if you do use them in a sharp way, you might end up losing your accounts. But yeah, like I'm not averse to them, but for all the reasons said, any multiple bet like a lucky 15, 31, 63 that involves a singles element, I don't think it's worth your time. If you want to cover singles, back the singles properly. If you're playing a multiple, you're looking for compounding value. In my head, that's the way I would play it. You mentioned anti-post betting, Felix. I know I probably do more anti-post than you, but it's definitely an area where I do think there is value in looking at the multiple selections, particularly each way terms. But yeah, I mean, if you were considering a multiple anti-post, how might you go about that?
So yeah, I mean, the example I'll probably give that I generally place a couple of these each year is on golden boot markets. So I had one 21-22 season, League One, Will Keane at Wigan came second, so I got the place there. Championship, Alexandra Mitrovic. This is a Trixie, by the way. Absolutely walked the golden boot in the championship. Thank you very much. Premier League. Oh, this would be a nice return if I got this up. Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Not exactly what I was looking for. Maybe a little bit heart ruling head there. But yeah, I certainly think, and going back to like a lucky 15, if you want to place one on the 4 top English divisions, I do think it's worth playing the lucky 15 over the Yankee there, especially with the each way turns, because generally you are going to be getting pretty chunky prices even on the singles themselves, especially if you look below that top 5 or 6 in the market. There generally tends to be some pretty good gems. So I think certainly in football, things like top goal scorer, golden boot markets, relegation markets. I love a relegation Trixie, maybe a top 6, top 7 for the EFL, stuff like that. Even in I think Como might ruin it for me the way they're playing under Seth Fabregas. But yeah, I think those um, slightly bigger anti-post prices are where I like to play these trixies. Maybe I'll stretch into Yankees lucky 15s next year. Who knows?
Yeah, well, anti-post multiples on the football is one of the sort of pillars of my year-long strategy, and it's because of the terms that you mentioned. Really, you're getting attractive prices, and you're getting each way terms, and they're the two essential things for me with multiples. Really, um, because if you can get the big prices and you can get the each way terms that are favourable, then even clicking places can be a really, really nice return. I'll give you an example here. If you could take say, let's say the championship winner at 12-1, the League One winner at tens, and the League Two winner at eights, for example, even getting the three of them placed, it's going to be a really, really nice return there. So when I'm spending a lot of time on these markets, I do find myself covering the multiples because I only need to hit one or two of the 20 odd hour place, and I'll make a really nice return. Now, I'm actually sweating a little bit this year because quite a lot of them featured MK Dons in League Two, which has been a disaster. A few featured Rotherham in League One, which have been a disaster. But I have still got like 4 or 5 that are alive. And as I say, I've very much gone into it knowing that I probably need to hit 2 of these to come out ahead. So I'd be unlucky to get them beat, to be honest, but I don't want to jinx anything. I think I mentioned one on a previous show. There's one really nice one that I'm just waiting on Leon top 4, and they are having a bit of a resurgence at the moment. So hopefully I can at least get to a position where I could do some hedging as well, because a couple of the legs have virtually weighed in as well. So this is the beauty of it. But there does need to be, and I think that is the overriding theme of this podcast. There is a place for multiples in anyone's betting arsenal, but the more seriously you take your betting, the more you need to be aware of the risks, the more you need to be aware of the disadvantages, and make sure that you're only using them and executing them where it's absolutely appropriate and not just willy-nilly. If you are going to do it, as we've said in previous podcasts, there is always a place for a fun bet. It is a leisure activity after all, but just adjust your stakes accordingly. If you're betting to a tenner a point, make sure your multiples are more like £1 or £2, and just, don't get carried away. You can still dream big and dream of that big win. We all like to do it, but you've got to be realistic about the situation as well. And I think actually, when you do refine your strategy, you can find that satisfaction in other areas as well. So I would probably get the same buzz from hitting a Trixie as I would a treble. Like it doesn't affect me that in the same way I say, I wish I'd covered the multiple. I don't have this, I wish I'd just gone for a straight treble. I'm really, really comfortable with the approach of the Trixie. I still get the same buzz that I would get from getting an accumulator up as getting a Trixie up. And the amount of times I hit 2 out of 3, yeah, it's frustrating, but it's not that frustrating when you're getting your stake back and you can go again. So yeah, I am a big fan of them. Like I say, there's a time and a place, but yeah, that would be my overriding thing on it. And Felix, any last comments on multiples from you?
I think it's just about knowing. It comes out. It always comes back to knowing why you're putting a bet on. And if you are putting it on for fun, go crazy, sure. But just always keep that mantra in the back of your mind about, am I putting this bet on at a price where I think the price should be a little bit shorter? And if you're doing that and you do want to keep betting multiples, fine. Theoretically, you are still putting on a good bet. But just experiment, I think, and just try and find a couple of areas where the multiples do click for you. It might not be in the areas, it very likely will not be in the areas where you're doing the bulk of your good business in the singles. You may have to go a little bit more rogue. You may even have to dip into another sport. But just test the waters. Like you say, keep your stakes very, very small. Maybe even do it the reverse and say, I'm going to bet to win X amount. And that way, if you're putting on these really fanciful accumulators, you're keeping your stakes very, very small then. So, yeah, I think it's a process of discovery, understanding the edge that the bookmakers hold. And I mean, we'll probably do a separate episode on this, but we've not even mentioned arguably the most popular type of multiple now, which is the the bet builder or the same game multi, where the bookmaker margin is absolutely huge. So understanding that the bookmaker does hold most of the aces, but if you look in the right areas, experiment, do your due diligence, then there is absolutely money to be made in playing small stakes accumulators, I think.
Okay, well that's all bases covered. As you say, we didn't really touch on bet builders all that much, but there is some argument for saying they might deserve their own episodes, such as their popularity and surge to the top of recreational betting. Yeah, I definitely think we could find an episode on bet builders and look at their foray into different sports as well. But that pretty much does us on the topic of multiples. Of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you place many multiple bets? Do you have a favorite type of multiple bets? If you don't place them, why don't you place them? And is it just too boring not placing multiples? Do you have to have some multiples in your life for a bit of excitement? Felix shaking his head. No, I've been nodding my head. Yes, I couldn't do it. I couldn't bet without placing a multiple. If you asked me to bet for a year and not place a single multiple, I couldn't do it. It's not in my nature. I've had to rein myself in a lot over the years, but I still love playing the multiples. The satisfaction I get from landing a Trixie or a Yankee or something like that, yeah, you just can't beat it. But that is life, isn't it? We're all cut from different cloths, and all makes the world go around. So hope you enjoyed our chat on multiples anyway. As I said, love to hear your comments down below. If you are still listening, let us know how often you use multiples and what your general thoughts are on them. Okay, so we're coming into the last part of this week's show, and we're going to firstly just discuss a viewer question that I had in from a good friend, Tom, who's a regular listener of the podcast. And he asked me, are there any sports that yourself and Felix don't like betting on, particularly Felix, who seems to like betting on everything that moves. But are there any sports that you don't like betting on, and any sports or events in particular where you just can't seem to land a winner for love nor money? It's a good question. It got me thinking, and I've kind of mentioned this on previous shows as well, but I've really refined the amount of sports that I bet on now, because there was just too many where I was just either plodding away at a small loss, or just realized that I don't have the depth of knowledge here to sustain a profit. So I've really refined my strategy in recent years. It is darts, football, snooker, and golf that takes up 90% of my betting time now. I would say I do still like to play racing occasionally, but I tend to trust judges sharper than me, or follow market movements, etc., just through the nature of my job. If I see one moving, I might get it on side, with a position to trade or something similar. But yeah, so for me, it's been more about knowing where to focus, really. And I guess in a broader sense as well, like darts, everyone says, oh, you love darts, you must bet on darts all the time. I don't bet Premier League darts. I don't bet on the Premier League darts. I've never managed to make a profit betting on the Premier League darts, really. The only bet I've placed this year on the Premier League darts is like a night winner. That's because I feel like that's basically a tournament market. It's like an outright market for that individual tournament, and I can approach that in the same way that I approach other tournament markets. I run some simulations and kind of look at what edges that have maybe not been factored in since the week before, look at head-to-heads, etc. I think that's useful. But the Premier League generally, the same 8 players playing each other over again and again and again and again. The guys setting these prices have got the biggest data sample set in the world that they could dream of. So if you think you're finding edges in the Premier League darts match betting, I tip my hat to you. But no, so that's been it for me, really, I guess. Is there an event that's caused me a lot of jeopardy in the past? Not really. I've had some heartbreaking golf majors. I don't think there's anything more that I've backed more seconds in than golf majors. The best one undoubtedly being at St Andrews. This would be going back 7 or 8 years now, I reckon. And it was a 3-way playoff. And I was there on course by the 18th green, and I had 2 of the 3 players in the playoff. And you know what happened. I don't even need to tell you who won, obviously. But yeah, the only one I didn't have covered was Zach Johnson, and yeah, delighted for Zach, see him lifting the claret jug. But yeah, just the majors. I mean, don't get me wrong, I bet them each way, and I normally make it pay. But yeah, I could count how many major winners I've backed on one hand, I think. So yeah, that would be the one for me, I think. Felix, where do you are there any areas you avoid is the first question. I think that's the question on my lips.
Yeah, I don't bet volleyball. I don't really bet boxing or MMA. Well, I bet a little bit of boxing, but not MMA. I don't think I had a single bet in the Olympics last year. And even the sports that I bet on
That shocks me.
in general,
That shocks me.
I did not have a bet in the whole Olympics
I had a
last year, even the
Cuban
football.
boxer that I had a Cuban boxer that obliged for me in the Olympics at 12-1.
Nice.
Yeah, I only backed it because I saw somebody write a really good tweet about it, and it was like a bit of a rick. Like one place were 12s and everywhere else was 6s. I thought I'll have a little tenner on that just for an interest, and I got really invested in his journey. And yeah, sure enough, he got a dodgy decision in the final. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I just like I really want to retract myself and just watch as a fan, and I tried to. There's been some Olympics in the past when I was a bit younger where I just watched the sports I liked, but I really made an effort to try and watch as many of the sports as possible this year. So no doubt in LA 2028, I'll have watched all these
Yeah,
sports for
the
4 years
Notebook will be
and I'll be
coming
getting
out.
involved everywhere. Yeah. But no, I think there's not really any sports where I'd stay. I'm going to stay away because my models are quite holistic in how they work, and it can be translated across sports. So I do like to dip into sports, but I've not really added any new sports to my arsenal for maybe 6-9 months, really. In terms of like events within sports, the biggest one for me would be men's Grand Slam tennis. Because the big difference, if anyone doesn't know, is they play first to 5 sets.
Mm.
Sorry, best of 5 sets, first to 3 in the Grand Slams. Whereas on tour, it's always first to 2. So you're getting these 4 big events throughout the year that are a completely different format. They really favour the better players because they're the ones that are used to playing in these Grand Slams, playing at the back end of them. In particular, like you've got the Australian Open, which is in the first month of the season. Everyone's had a 2-week break. There's only 2 tournaments before that. It's really difficult to find.
They must be quite hard to price those, like because, like you said, I mean, the data sets the traders are working with are almost not irrelevant, but it's a totally different challenge, isn't it? How many players do you see lose 5 setters due to fitness, like just wilt away at the end of a
Yeah,
game and stuff? And then the challenge as well of being able to play multiple 5 setters across a 2-week period, and then
yeah.
when is that going to take a drain on your body? I think we touched a little bit last week about Djokovic, maybe maybe the body's just starting to slowly fail a little bit, and how does that factor into his Grand Slam price? It's really tough for those trying to price it up, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it's got a little bit easier for the bookies, I reckon, with the emergence of Sinner
Too
and
dominant,
Alcaraz.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, because you've had a generation before that, but certainly in the mid-range prices, like we saw Taylor Fritz reach a Grand Slam final last year. I think he was maybe about 15-16 to 1, and he just got absolutely slashed after that. But even recently, we've seen Jack Draper win his first Masters 1000 title, and he got slashed into joint second favorite for the next tournament, which has been in Miami, still going on this week. Lost his first game. I think he's now into third favorite for Wimbledon, about 8-1, whereas he's been going off 20-1, 25-1 for
They've
most of
got to
these
be
majors.
fearing everybody
last
backing him, though, haven't they? Yeah, for
Absolutely, and
Wimbledon.
of course those liabilities play into it. But yeah, I think the Grand Slam tennis, like you said, the golf majors as well. I think it's when you're playing stuff week to week, and then you've got these marquee events where there's a lot more public money coming on them than there is from week to week. B, with all the media attention and hype around them, it does tend to favour the better, more experienced players. So yeah, I think going from playing smaller weekly events that are just ticking away in the background to suddenly a big event where with a lot more attention on it, that tends to be where I struggle as a general rule. But yeah, men's Grand Slam tennis, very much fewer bets compared to what I would be having on a usual ATP event.
Yeah, very interesting. Rory McIlroy's price for the Masters always a good laughing point for me as well, because everybody is desperate to see him complete that career Grand Slam. And
Even this week, he's is it the Houston Open starts today? Scheffler's 4-1, Rory 6-1, and it's 33 bars. I think.
Yeah. Oh, I'm stuck in at the Houston Open. Let's hope for some results there. Yeah. So, well, that nicely leads us on to the week ahead, I suppose, and the final part of the show where we just discuss what's on our radar for the week ahead as well. You mentioned the Houston Open there. We've got the Hero Indian Open on the DP World Tour. I am involved in both of those, so I'll be hoping for some good runs there. Snooker, we're not quite there yet. We're getting very close to the World Championship. I've got some nice positions there. Just need them to, oblige, and one of them give me a run now. I've got a couple of the Chinese players really nicely covered, and I've got Neil Robertson who's in great nick, but sometimes has a bit of a bad record at the Crucible. So I'm hopeful there. You'll probably be hearing me talk about that a lot when that tournament's up and running. And then darts, I've got 2 Players Championship events next week, the field of which has just been confirmed. Unfortunately, Luke Littler and Luke Humphreys are turning up, so always makes it a little bit harder, but there's some bigger prices there, so we'll get stuck in and we'll see how we go. Felix, what's on your agenda for the 7 days ahead?
Yeah, mostly across the pond. Like I say, the baseball's starting. It's getting to the business end of the regular season in the basketball and the ice hockey, and then the playoffs start. Not sure how much I'll be getting involved in the playoffs. They generally are quite tricky to bet on for the same reasons I mentioned with the tennis and the golf. You've also got this college basketball tournament, March Madness, going on. That's been great fun. I've watched a couple of the games. It's crazy to me how much like university teams mean to people who go to the university, even people who left the university before. I cannot imagine going to watch the University of Liverpool football team now and there being a crowd of 20,000 turn up and cheer them on.
We got to get 20.
Yeah, we got 500 in our student union for the darts, and that's probably one of the biggest events we've ever done as a sports society. So, yeah, and then there's we're back to cup action as well. We've got the FA Cup quarterfinals this weekend, and then the other
any early leans on those quarterfinals? I mean, I've got I went to university in Preston. And I've got, a couple of Preston mates who are very much looking forward to taking on Villa, but they were pretty downcast about their chances. But I said, look, it's a one-off game at home. You just don't know, do you? Villa got other priorities. So, that's an interesting one for me. Any thoughts on the games? It's Bournemouth City, am I right in thinking?
Yeah, so I'm on Bournemouth at 40-1.
Yeah.
And it's taken a lot of me to not hedge out. I've hedged out the tiniest bit, but it's taken a lot of willpower. I think the way City are playing, Bournemouth at home as well, City very, very marginal favourites. I think there's just a massive chance for someone who has not won a cup for a long time or has never won a cup. Or you've got City, the only team in the last 30 years still left in the competition to win a major trophy. But I'm also really leaning towards Brighton as well.
I backed Brighton the last 2 years and not this year. So unfortunately, I'll have to say Brighton are probably going to win it.
Yeah.
And Fulham Palace is a great opportunity for them too as well, isn't it? Two clubs who would have been absolutely desperate for a cup run, but having spent so many years in mid-table Premier League mediocrity.
Yeah, and you've got Palace who've got a pretty good FA Cup record the last decade. They got to a final in 2016, couple of quarterfinals.
Beaten by Louis van Gaal's Man United, I think they were.
Yeah. Jesse Lingard won the goal. But everyone just remembers Pardew running down the touchline after Wolf Zaha opened the scoring. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. And even on midweek next week, we've got a Premier League round, but also the semi-finals of the 4 major European Cups, continentals of Spain, France, Italy, and Germany. No massive fancies. I mean, PSG probably waltz to the French title. German one's interesting. I don't mind. I think Stuttgart are still in, and I don't mind them. And then we've got the second legs of the Copa del Rey semi-finals. We had that mad game between Barca and Atleti in the first
4-3,
leg.
Was it?
Yes, to Barcelona, and then Real 1-0 up against Sociedad. So it's looking set for a Clasico final, but I'm still not ruling out a Madrid derby final, and I would probably be leaning with Atletico if that is the case.
Okay, interesting stuff then. A few snippets to finish on. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Better Days Ahead. As always, we're taking suggestions for our future podcast in the comments. So if there's a topic you would like us to cover, I think this is our 5th episode now, so plenty still to be discussed. And equally, if you've got any viewer comments or questions that you want us to take 5 minutes on at the end of next week's show, then get them down below. We love hearing from you. There'll be a few clips of the show going out on Twitter as well, so all shares on there appreciated as we try and grow. And wishing you the best of luck with your punting this week. We'll be back next week to do it all over again, but between now and then, good luck, stay with odds now, and we'll see you soon.